Hello and welcome to the Wireless LAN News Desk. My name is Tom Carpenter. I'm the CTO at CWNP. And this week in the news, a couple of things that I want to talk about. First of all, we're going to be talking about 5G and what its impact is likely to be in the coming years. It's going to be significant. So we want to understand what impact it might have on us as particularly 802.11 wireless LAN engineers. And then for a little bit of fun at the end, we'll briefly talk about 20 years of Bluetooth. So first of all, 5G wireless. Now, it's been talked about a lot for a lot of years because it goes all the way back over 7 or 8 years ago when they first really started getting the buzz going about 5G. And various different countries had organizations that they brought together to study the next evolution of cellular technology. And now here we are in 2019 and 2018, rather. I'm getting a year ahead of myself. In 2018, and we're looking at some very serious realities. For example, the Winter Olympics are coming up, and Intel is promising there'll be 5G coverage at the Winter Olympics. We have AT&T and Verizon committing that this year they're going to start rolling out 5G. T-Mobile is looking at the year 2020. A lot of different organizations around the world are looking at 2020 as kind of that target area. So it's coming. And now that it's coming, we have to ask, why does it matter? Well, first of all, let's look at 8 different specifications that really defined the goals of 5G for improvements over 4G or LTE. The first thing is up to 10 gigabits per second data rates. Now, that does not necessarily mean each device is going to get 10 gigabits per second of throughput. Okay, we're talking about that for data rates. And much of that has been done in the millimeter wave area. So we're talking about 30 gigahertz and up. And so much of that is really line of sight, direct line of sight for certain types of links and communications. Whereas the more general coverage of cellular that we think of is probably going to be a little lower. And the reality is that they're aiming at tens of megabits per second per device when multiple devices are in a unit area. So the goal here then is a max data rate of around 10 gigabits per second. Another key factor was latency, dealing with the general normal latency that we have in wireless communications. If you've ever noticed, even with your home network, if you do a speed test and you look at your ping time when you're connected to a wired desktop, and then you go to your laptop that's on Wi-Fi, the very same ISP connection, that ping is usually significantly longer. And so latency is a real issue with wireless communications. The goal, 1 millisecond latency. So they often call it near zero latency. Well, 1 millisecond is pretty close to zero. Then it's 1,000 times the bandwidth per unit area. So they want to multiply the overall bandwidth per unit area by 1,000 times, up to 100 times the number of connected devices per unit area. So instead of just 2 times or 3 times, up to 100 times. And of course, the phrase up to makes you realize that we're not necessarily going to be there right away. These are long-term goals. The 5 nines of availability, 99.999% uptime, and 100% coverage. Again, these are the long-term goals. 90% reduction in network energy usage. And this is a significant thing, reducing the energy consumption of the network. But on the other side, up to 10-year battery life for low-power IoT devices. So they wanted a radio technology that could work in IoT devices and work for a very long time on batteries. So think about some fairly remote area where the 5G network provides coverage and you want to place some device in that area for monitoring, whether it's agricultural or if it's something more along the lines of a US government monitoring solution or some other government monitoring. Or even just that device that sits along the road that checks your speed and reports back how fast you were going and took a picture of you. Those kinds of devices, they want them to run on batteries for a long time. Now, we say battery, it could be solar power, but those solar powered devices use batteries for when the sun's not out, right? So these are some of the primary goals that really drove 5G. They sound great, and they are great, and we'll see them come into play over time. The very first deployments will be in, no doubt, larger metropolitan areas, things like that, and spreading outward like we've seen in the past with upgrades to the cellular network. And we'll see this grow in such a way that probably in a 1 to 3 year window, we'll have fairly ubiquitous coverage from the time that it starts rolling out. Now, the issue then is that it's going to take a little while for it to roll out. And at the same time as that is happening, Wi-Fi is evolving too. So we have to ask a very important question. And that is, will 5G be the death of Wi-Fi? It's been a debate now for 2 or 3 years, people talking about it and what it's going to do. There's some discussion of use of unlicensed space and things like that for 5G. Well, let's not get into all of those debates, but let's talk about what I would say are 3 fundamental reasons why 5G will not be the death of Wi-Fi, at least in the short term. No one can predict 20 years down the road, but it is important to know that they're not expecting to start doing away with 4G support until around 2030. So that tells you there's a little while before they expect complete and total utilization of 5G. So with that said, let's talk about these 3 reasons why I say that Wi-Fi is here to stay, at least for a very long haul. The first one is Wi-Fi today with 802.11ac already does capacity or the ability to service many clients in a coverage area with unlicensed frequency very well when it's designed well. And so Wi-Fi already does that really well. That's why we leave our LTE and go over to Wi-Fi when we get into a building where we have Wi-Fi access. It's not just because of cost anymore. A lot of us have unlimited data plans. I do, but I still want to use Wi-Fi when it's available because it's faster, it's lower latency, and so forth. These are some of the things that 5G wants to address. So well-designed Wi-Fi already addresses some of them. It doesn't necessarily address all of them today, such as spectral reuse or efficiency of spectrum use. That's coming with 802.11ax. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the field as well. So that's one thing. Wi-Fi already does some of the things really well that 5G wants to do. The problem then is this roaming from LTE over to Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi back to LTE and so forth. That's the real pain point today. And I've got a solution for that coming up if people will listen. Now, the second thing is that it's hard. It's very hard to unseat a massive install base. What I mean is there are just a massive number of wireless devices, brand new wireless devices just announced at CES. There'll be more announced next year. Wi-Fi is going to keep being developed, deployed, and rolled out because it's there. It's already there, right? So there's a massive install base. Now, let me give you an analogy from the operating system world. A little bit of a statistical comparison here. So in the operating system world, you have this thing called Microsoft Windows, right? We all love it. We all hate it. We all use it. Microsoft Windows is used today by about 88% of computing devices that are in the laptop or desktop computer genre, okay? So about 88%, depending on the statistics you look at, it'll vary by 2 to 4 points, but around 88%. The lowest I've seen recently was 84.4, I believe it was. Mac OS is at 8.2. It's been as high as 10 or 11%. And it's fallen off to as low as 8%, again, depending on the source you look at. These numbers that I'm going to give you here, so Windows 88%, almost 89, Mac OS 8.2, and Linux at 2.3. This comes from watching what people are using, browsing thousands of websites. So thousands of websites that are monitored, and then aggregating all of that data and looking at the operating systems in use. Another site called Statista.com does a little bit more than just looking at websites. And it gives about a 2-point bump to Mac OS and a 2-point drop to Windows OS. So either way you look at it, you're still looking at a vast majority of the communications are taking place from Windows devices today. Now, why am I making a big deal out of that? Well, realize that people love Mac OS. The people who use it love it. They say that it's the best thing ever, that Apple's a great company and so forth. And I'm not arguing any of those points, but it hasn't had the impact they would have expected it to have. I remember about 10 years ago, people were saying, you watch, Mac OS is going to supplant Windows by 2020. Well, good luck. You've got about 2 years left. It's not anywhere close. In fact, Windows has been able to maintain staying above 80% of the market share, with the exception of one window of time, October 2016. One Statista.com report showed it down to 80.4%, almost dropped out of the 80 percentile. So the point is that Windows dominates. But why does it dominate? Is it because it's best? Well, some would argue that it is. I like Windows. I'm familiar with Windows. I like Mac OS. I'm familiar with it now. I use them both quite a lot. But what I've found is that the reality is install base matters. Getting a large number of users matters. Remember the old search engine wars, for another analogy, and how that you had AltaVista, InfoSeek, a web crawler, all of these, and then Google comes along and gets the eyeballs. And now today, to introduce a new search engine and be able to compete would be a significant challenge because people use Google. And yes, I know some people use other search engines, but most people use Google and most people use Windows. And it's very challenging to get them to move away from what they've become comfortable with or what they know. There has been much movement toward Mac OS in the younger generation, but that takes a lot of time. Okay, so why am I going into all of that? Well, the reality is massive marketing dollars, a lot of positioning to say that Mac OS is better. You remember the commercials, you trip over the power cable and it doesn't knock your laptop off. And so, of course, laptop manufacturers in the PC world began to develop similar types of cables. But the point is that all of those marketing dollars just made really a dent in the Windows install base. And that dent isn't all that big. It's potential that it could get bigger, but actually the trend is back toward Windows and away from macOS if you look at the statistics. Very slightly, but that's the trend. So I said all that to say this. 5G is amazingly awesome, but it's going to take a lot of time. Even if it did supplant Wi-Fi, we're talking 10 years down the road before we could even consider it to be such an impact that Wi-Fi install bases would reduce by a significant percentage. And that's really what we're talking about here. Are they going to reduce? No, all the statistics show Wi-Fi is going to grow and continue to have more and more deployments, more and more APs, more and more Wi-Fi clients. And that's happening in the next 3 to 5 years. So even with that, if it does decline somewhat after that, Wi-Fi is still going to be big. But I do want to interject here before I move on from that second point that it's hard to beat an entrenched large install base. I do want to say that Wi-Fi technicians should be learning about 5G. They should be learning about cellular technologies because integration is becoming more and more important. Finally, the third reason that it's going to be a challenge to quickly supplant Wi-Fi is that 5G people, the knowledge base, the people that know it well, are way smaller than the people that know Wi-Fi. Even if you don't go to the expert level, just go to the professional level where people understand fundamentally how the technology works, but maybe they don't have years of expertise with it. Even at that level, there is a very small pool of people compared to those that know about Wi-Fi. So you take all these together and you see that Wi-Fi is going to be here for quite a while still to stay. But there is a reality for Wi-Fi in the next 10 years I think we need to think about. Integration is going to become more important, as I've already said. So handoff between 5G and 802.11 must be more seamless than it is today. And the Wi-Fi Alliance is trying to help us with that. 5G data plans are going to be interesting to watch because we've seen them fluctuate. Unlimited, no, back to limited, back to unlimited already with 4G LTE. So what are we going to see with 5G? Is it going to be unlimited? Because if I've got all this great speed, but I can't use it past the third day of my monthly subscription, it doesn't benefit me a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And then here's my suggestion. Remember I said there's this problem with handover? How about we do away with the problem with handover? How about we have the option, if someone has the battery life and wants to use it, for dual concurrent connectivity? In other words, I can be connected to Wi-Fi at the same time as I'm connected to LTE. And the decision about which one I'm communicating across at any given moment is based on the throughput capabilities of that connection, rather than whether the connection exists or not. Who would have thought of doing something like that? Well, at any rate, the point is LTE is being upgraded. We're going to go to 5G. It's coming along, and Wi-Fi is going along right beside it. With 802.11ax, a lot of the goals of 5G are in there. And when you look at what the two technologies will do, 11ax does some of them better, and 5G does some of them better. So there'll be use cases for both. Okay, last topic, a little bit of fun. Bluetooth, here it is. We're in 2018. I don't know if you caught that yet. Second month, second day, 2018. And here in 2018, guess what? It's the 20-year anniversary of Bluetooth. No, not the ancient ruler. We're talking here about the wireless technology, Bluetooth. And Bluetooth started the Special Interest Group, or SIG, started in 1998. The actual first standard wasn't completed until 1999. But Bluetooth went through some very bad growing pains early on. There were a lot of compatibility problems between different Bluetooth devices, and getting them to sync up was a real problem. And then Bluetooth 2.0 came along, and it was really, really good. And so we've been using Bluetooth pretty heavily since that time. 20 years later, Bluetooth is still here. There have been times when people have come along and said, hey, maybe Wi-Fi could just replace it. You use a Wi-Fi mouse, use a Wi-Fi keyboard, things like that. But it just doesn't make sense to, because Wi-Fi is longer range and Bluetooth is shorter range and low output power. So Bluetooth has stayed around, and it's probably going to continue to stay around and continue to be a problem for you in 2.4 gigahertz in some scenarios. Thankfully, in most cases, no real interference issues happen by just using one or two Bluetooth devices. If you use a dozen of them, you might run into some pain points. But congratulations, Bluetooth. You've made it to 20 years. Well, with that, again, I'm Tom Carpenter, CTO at CWNP, and I'm glad you joined us today. And make sure you subscribe below if you haven't already. Click the bell so that you can be alerted and notified when we go live. And I'll see you next week.